A few years ago, something unusual started happening on the internet.
BTS, superstar K-pop band BTS.
A group from South Korea was suddenly appearing everywhere. Millions of people across the world seem to be discovering them at the same exact time. And the strange part was, the explosion wasn't coming from radio stations or record labels. It was coming from the internet. And the internet back then is very different from the one we have now. For a moment, it felt like the entire internet was moving together. Millions of people watching the same music video, streaming the same song, trending the same hashtags, and at the center of that digital gravity was BTS. But that moment didn't happen by accident. They didn't just top charts. They built one of the most powerful fan movements in music history. From the symbolic storytelling of Blood, Sweat, and Tears, to the emotional weight of Spring Day, to explosive global success of Dynamite, the world they're returning to today looks very different from the one they left. The internet has changed, the music industry has changed. Even the fandom that helped build their rise has changed, which makes their comeback in 2026 more than just another comeback. It's a test. Because BTS rose during one of the last moments in internet history where millions of people could experience culture together at the same exact time. Before algorithms fragmented our attention, before trends lasted days instead of months, before the internet stopped moving as one. So the real question isn't just whether BTS will succeed again or not. Can the group that once synchronized the entire internet do it again? When I first discovered BTS, I was 13 years old listening to DNA in my middle school hallway. Now I'm 21. I'm not 13 listening to DNA anymore. But the story behind BTS and the world that created them might be one of the most interesting cultural phenomena that happened in the internet age. DNA. Hey guys, it's Sydney and you're watching Sid's Films. I'm back once again. With another video essay. I'm actually enjoying making these, so this might be a channel regular because I really like these. This is a video I've been thinking about making for a really long time. From my middle school K-pop cover days to my K-pop edit days to now my adult life, K-pop has been a core part of not just my Spotify rotation, but my life in general. And although people debate a lot within the K-pop community, it's hard to deny that you can't really talk about K-pop without bringing up BTS. At the height of their career, they weren't just another K-pop group. Even now, years after they last promoted together as a full group, their legacy is everywhere around the world. Call them Mr. Worldwide. For me personally, BTS opened my eyes to music outside of the Western Hemisphere. As someone who's very nostalgic, I thought it would be interesting to step into my adulthood while revisiting this part of my past. A past where strangers across the world can connect through songs we didn't fully understand, but somehow still felt. And honestly, at a time where the world is falling apart, even right now, I want to revisit a moment where millions of people were moving together all through the love of music. There are two very important things that I must say at the beginning, and I need you all to pay attention. First, while this video does focus on BTS, they didn't exist in a vacuum. First and second generations of K-pop helped build the industry that made their success possible. Those artists walked so BTS could run. And second, this video is coming from the perspective of an American fan. I don't live in South Korea, I'm not Korean, I don't speak Korean, so this essay isn't meant to reflect on the full impact BTS has made globally, but instead it's a reflection on how their rise shaped the Western internet and music culture through someone who's watched it happen through real time. To understand how BTS became a global phenomenon, we have to go back to the world of K-pop before it was even K-pop, in a realm where they didn't even exist yet. Before K-pop became a global industry, before the stadium tours, the fan chants, and billion-view music videos, global music landscape looked very different. For decades, pop culture flowed in one direction, outward, from the West. American and European artists dominated global charts, global radio, and global influence. English was the language of international pop, and if music wasn't coming from Los Angeles, New York, or London, it wasn't coming from anywhere. Asia had thriving music industries, massive ones, in fact, but outside of their home countries, they were largely invisible to the global landscape. In the 1980s and early 90s, South Korea's music scene was heavily controlled, conservative, and deeply influenced by older ballad traditions. Performances were formal, artists followed strict broadcasting rules, creative experimentation was limited. Pop culture we know now was not the pop culture at the time. But beneath the surface, a generation was growing up listening to something very different. American hip-hop, New Jack Swing, R&B, and dance music, which are heavily influenced in Black culture, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Koreans were absorbing global sounds through bootleg tapes, imported CDs, and underground dance culture, and eventually, someone decided to bring those sounds home. In 1992, something happened on Korean television that quietly changed the future of global pop music. A group called So Taeji and Boys stepped into the stage of a televised talent show. Their song blended hip-hop beats, rap verses, and synchronized dance choreography. For Korean television at the time, it was very shocking, very bold of them. The judges hated it. They gave the performance one of the lowest scores in the show's history. But the public reaction was actually the exact opposite. Young audiences loved it. The song exploded in popularity and quickly became one of the biggest hits in the country. Just like that, the rules of Korean music began to change. So Taeji and the Boys had introduced something completely new: youth culture. Their music spoke about topics rarely addressed in Korean pop at the time: education pressure, generational conflict, and the frustrations of young people growing up in a rapidly modernized society. But their influence went far beyond the lyrics. They introduced rap into mainstream Korean music, they fused Western genres with the Korean language, and they proved that choreography, fashion, and image could be just as important as the music itself. Other words, I guess you could say they kind of created the blueprint of modern K-pop. Entertainment companies quickly realized that music could be engineered, trained, and produced in a completely new way. In the mid-1990s, companies like SM Entertainment began something unprecedented. Teenagers were recruited and trained for years in singing, dancing, language, media training, acting, you name it. They would debut in carefully designed groups, each member assigned a role, a personality, and a visual identity. These performers were later known as idols. As part music industry, part training academy, part cultural export machine, in the late 1990s, the first generation of idol groups began to appear. After that, the K-pop industry was born. Its biggest transformation was still coming, because in 1997, South Korea was hit with a devastating 1997 Asian financial crisis. The country's economy collapsed overnight. Major corporations failed, millions lost their jobs, and the nation was forced to accept a massive bailout from the International Monetary Fund. The crisis forced the country to rethink its future. Traditional industries alone wouldn't be enough, so the government began investing in something different: their culture. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, South Korea began heavily supporting its entertainment industry, funding media production, encouraging cultural exports, and building infrastructure for film, television, and music. Film started gaining international recognition, and K-pop companies refined the idol system even further, creating highly polished groups designed for both domestic and international audiences. This cultural movement became known as the Korean Wave, or Hallyu. In the 2000s, K-pop has entered its second generation. Groups like TVXQ, Girls' Generation, and Big Bang began expanding the industry beyond Korea, building massive fan bases across Japan, China, and Southeast Asia. The system was working, but there was still one problem. Despite its growing popularity across Asia, K-pop remained largely invisible to the Western Hemisphere, and breaking into that system seemed nearly impossible. Until in 2012, a Korean music video featuring a man in a blue suit dancing in a horse stable started spreading rapidly online. It also became the first video in history to reach 1 billion views on YouTube. The song was Gangnam Style by PSY. First time, K-pop has cracked the global algorithm. A few years later, a small group from an unrelatively unknown company would take the global attention and turn it into something the music industry hasn't really seen before. First stumbled across BTS, I was 13 years old. The song was DNA. Even to this day, I could still remember the choreo because that's how much I practiced that. Like, I remember this so vividly. I was just replaying the music video over and over and over again because it was uncharted territory for me. At the time, I felt like I stumbled into something completely different from the music everybody else around me was listening to. But with that being said, every time somebody saw what I was listening to or who I was looking at, the reaction was always the same.
Why are you watching Chinese people?
Or,
are you listening to something you don't even understand?
K-pop wasn't normalized in American schools. It wasn't mainstream, it wasn't everywhere. It wasn't something a lot of people understood. This is not me being niche and underground in any way. If you were listening to K-pop during the first generation through the start of the third generation, a lot of people didn't really understand it. But explaining this to people was just an incredibly taxing task. I do think some of it may have been rooted in ignorance, yes, with a twinge of racism and a tinge of xenophobia, but like I said, another conversation for another day. But what none of us understood at the time was that something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. In the world, millions of people were discovering BTS at the same exact time. Fans from different countries were connecting through music videos, translations, and online communities. At the time, platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and Tumblr were essential to how fans discovered music. This made something unusual very possible. Fans could coordinate. They organized streaming parties, they translated interviews and videos, they created edits, theory posts, and discussion threads. All of those, trust me. If y'all are deep into it like I was, like, I really felt like I was in like a parallel world. Like, it was such a strange occurrence to like watch happen, and then looking back on that, just like, wow, like I can't believe that was like life back then. As different fans from different cultures were all participating at the same exact time, the community quickly became global. Behind the scenes videos to live streams to social media posts, BTS built an unusually direct relationship with their fans. This kind of interaction created something powerful. When BTS debuted in 2013, they weren't backed by any major companies. Instead, they came from a much smaller company, Big Hit Entertainment. Y'all remember that intro they used to have? The good old days. Their music focused heavily on themes that many young people rarely heard. Pressure from school, expectations from society, mental health, identity, instead of presenting a polished fantasy that was common in idol culture, that created an emotional connection that felt unusually personal. In many ways, the global growth of BTS was driven by a community on the internet, and that community would eventually be known as the ARMY. Looking back, it's easy to see the numbers now. The records, the sold out stadiums, the global influence. But when I discovered BTS, none of that existed. I happened to like them, along with millions of other people who felt like they found something special. At the time, we had no idea how this small community would eventually grow into one of the most powerful fandoms in music history. Because as BTS continued to grow, they started doing something that would change how fans interacted with their music entirely. They built a story filled with symbolism, mystery, and hidden narratives that fans spent years trying to decode. Many people first discovered BTS, they assumed the group's success came from their catchy songs, sharp choreography, or a highly dedicated fan base. But longtime fans knew something else was happening beneath the surface. Very interesting learning that regular music can be turned into like stories, novels, novellas of sorts. Groups made this image. Each album release had a different story. It had something new to add to the story. Another group I think about at the top of my head in regards to storytelling is TXT, which is their brother group. The lores behind some of these like albums, crazy. At the time, it was something I haven't really seen before. I think that added to my fascination of them. Wow, like they're not just making music, they're doing something here. Across albums, music videos, short films, and visual symbolism, the group slowly built what fans would eventually call the BTS universe, or the BU. Moments that seemed disconnected at first began forming a larger narrative when placed together. The story started to take shape during the era of the most beautiful moment in life. Music videos like I Need You and Run introduced a darker and more emotional storyline. The members appeared as characters navigating friendship, loss, and the confusion of being young. The story expanded even further following the release of Wings. The album's visual and themes drew inspiration from the novel Damien, story about self-discovery, temptation, and the difficult process of growing into adulthood. Music video for Blood, Sweat and Tears, BTS, that's kind of funny. The music video for Blood, Sweat and Tears was filled with symbolic imagery, art references, religious symbolism, and metaphors about innocence, corruption, and transformation. For many viewers, the videos raised more questions than answers, but that was a part of the experience. Fans began analyzing every detail, every symbol, every line of dialogue. Their videos started appearing across YouTube, where fans attempted to decode the meaning behind the story. Many fans, following BTS didn't just feel like listening to music, it felt like solving a puzzle. Fans weren't just passive listeners, but they actively participated in decoding the narrative. And as more people discovered the depths of the storytelling, the curiosity soon turned into fascination. As fans tried to decode that story, something even more interesting was happening. The fandom itself was evolving. Most fan bases support an artist. ARMY built an ecosystem. As the world around BTS grew larger, what began as a community of listeners slowly turned into a highly organized global network. Across social media platforms, fans began dividing labor in ways that resembled a professional media operation. Translation teams, subtitle interviews, and live streams within hours, allowing fans across the world to experience the same content simultaneously regardless of language. Archival accounts cataloged years of performances, lyrics, and interviews, performing the evolving story of the group. Theory communities analyzed narrative threads within BTS's music and visuals. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about ARMY was its scale. Millions of individuals across different countries, cultures, and time zones began coordinating their efforts. Social media movements amplified BTS's music far beyond the reach of traditional marketing. In many ways, ARMY had become something the music industry hadn't really quite seen before. A decentralized, powerful engine powered entirely by the fans. But their influence didn't just stop at promotion. Over time, the fandom began organizing charitable projects, fundraising drives, and social campaigns inspired by the messages of BTS's work. And part of what made the system of ARMY so powerful was the connection many fans felt with BTS. Psychologists often describe this as a parasocial relationship, a one-sided emotional relationship where audiences feel personally connected to public figures they may have never seen. I remember listening to Spring Day for the first time and crying. If you don't know, Spring Day is thought to be a tribute of the 2014 Seoul ferry tragedy, where over 250 students lost their life by the sinking of the ship. The details of the tragedy to me are incredibly gray. I will actually link a video of someone explaining it a little more in detail. Along with the tragedy, the song itself is also thought to be inspired by the Snowpiercer novel and The Ones Who Walk Away from Amelas. Songs like Spring Day resonated with listeners navigating loss, grief, and loneliness. Music has a way of attaching itself to moments we experience in our lives, especially during adolescence when identity and emotion are still taking its shape. For many listeners, discovering BTS during those years, the music became tied to personal narratives, and that emotional connection helped explain why the loyalty within the fandom grew so strong. Because if you think about it, a lot of us were growing into our personalities at the same time we were listening to them. Fans began studying the mechanics behind chart rankings, award shows, and streaming platforms. They analyzed how systems like Billboard charts calculated success, including metrics like streaming numbers, digital purchases, and radio play. Guides began circulating across the fandom explaining how these systems work. Fans shared detailed streaming instructions for platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, explaining how to rotate playlists to avoid spam detection. Buying campaigns coordinated mass purchases through platforms like iTunes. Voting teams organized global schedules for award shows like Billboard Music Awards, with reminders spread across different time zones. Over time, these strategies had real results, as you can see. They weren't only talented, but they also had an incredibly smart fan base behind them. When BTS crossed into the global spotlight, they didn't arrive alone. They arrived with one of the most powerful cultural networks the internet has ever assembled. And that network would soon help push them into places the global music industry has longed to believe were impossible to reach. For decades, the rules of global pop music seemed fairly established. If an artist wanted international access, especially in the United States, there were certain barriers that almost always had to be crossed. English language music, major record label backing, heavy radio play, and the approval from the Western entertainment industry. These gatekeepers had long determined which artists could reach the top of the global music ecosystem. If you didn't break into the US market, the industry often treated you as a regional success rather than a global one. BTS didn't follow that specific path. They didn't first explode in the United States. They built a massive global audience online, long before much of the Western industry began paying attention. And slowly, those traditional barriers began to weaken. The turning point came in 2017. At the Billboard Music Awards, BTS won Top Social Artist, defeating major global pop stars like Justin Bieber. To many viewers watching the broadcast, the moment was confusing. A Korean group forming primarily in Korean had just beat one of the most established artists in the Western Hemisphere. But for ARMY, it wasn't really surprising. It was proof that the balance of power had already began shifting online. Soon, the milestones continued. BTS began debuting albums at #1 on the Billboard 200. Their songs began climbing the Billboard Hot 100, and their concerts sold out arenas and eventually stadiums across North America and Europe. Television appearances that once seemed unlikely began multiplying. Late night shows, award ceremonies, major magazine covers. Each appearance forced the industry to confront a reality that it had long resisted. Language barriers were no longer a barrier, and fandoms were no longer passive listeners. The internet had created a pathway to success to bypass the traditional gatekeepers of the pop music industry. And the moment became impossible to ignore when BTS came out with Dynamite. The song debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, the first time a BTS song had opened at the very top of the charts. And their success didn't just transform charts, it transformed the company behind them. As BTS's influence expanded worldwide, the company itself began to grow. Eventually rebranding as HYBE Corporation, the label transformed into a global internet conglomerate. What had once been a struggling company was now one of the most powerful forces in the modern music industry. And once those gates opened, they would never be closed the same way again. By the late 2010s, yes, 2010s, strange to say it like that, it had become clear that the success of BTS wasn't just changing music charts, but it was also affecting entire industries. According to economic research, BTS contributes roughly 5.5 trillion won, which is about $4.6 billion, to South Korea's economy every single year. That accounts for roughly 0.3% of the country's total GDP. To put that in perspective, the economic impact of BTS is comparable to the contribution of major national corporations. Their influence extends far beyond music sales and streaming numbers. One of the most visible effects of their success appears in tourism. Estimates suggest that BTS attracts roughly 800,000 tourists to South Korea every single year. That's about 1 out of 13 international visitors to the country. Fans travel specifically to experience locations connected to the group. Music video filming sites, concert venues, and exhibitions and pop-up events. Cities connected to BTS has also seen a significant increase in tourism as well. Their concerts also generate massive economic activities. A single BTS concert held in South Korea can generate up to 1.2 trillion won in economic impact through tourism, hotels, transportation, and local spending. For many fans, attending a BTS concert isn't just a night out event, it's a major international trip. Touring became one of the group's most powerful economic engines. The Love Yourself tour alone grossed nearly $200 million, becoming one of the highest grossing tours ever by Korean acts. BTS also accelerated the global spread of Korean culture. This broader culture movement is often referred to as the Korean wave or Hallyu. I'm telling you, they were helping seal the Hanmul. In South Korea, all able-bodied men are required to complete mandatory military service. As BTS's global influence grew, the question of whether the group should receive special exemptions became a topic of discussion. The issue was discussed within the National Assembly of South Korea. The government allowed the members to delay their enlistment. All members of BTS chose to fulfill their service obligations. And along with that also changed the laws of military service in regards to idols. By this point, the impact of BTS could no longer be measured by music charts alone. They had influenced tourism, expanded global touring, accelerated the Korean wave, and reshaped how culture and economics could move through the modern entertainment industry. What began as a music group had grown into something much larger. To really understand how BTS became a global phenomenon, you really have to understand the internet they rose in. Because the internet of the late 2010s was fundamentally different from the internet we use today. Around 2016 to 2019, global online culture was largely shaped by platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and Tumblr. These platforms weren't perfect, of course, but they had one important characteristic. They allowed large groups of people to converge around the same content at the same exact time. Trending topics on Twitter were visible to everyone. The video trending on YouTube was visible to millions. If something was happening online, you didn't just see it in a small corner of the internet, you saw it literally everywhere. And that structure made it possible for cultural moments to spread globally almost instantly. When BTS released a music video, fans weren't discovering it slowly through personalized feeds. They were waiting for it together. And when the video finally dropped, millions of people clicked play at the same exact time. Hashtags trended worldwide, streaming numbers exploded. For a brief moment, the the internet felt synchronized. But today, the internet works a little differently. Platforms like TikTok introduced a new model of content distribution built around hyper-personalized algorithms. A blessing and a curse. Instead of showing everyone the same trending topics, these platforms show each user a feed designed specifically for them. People on TikTok can open the app at the same exact time, but can step into completely different worlds. Instead of a few large shared culture spaces, we now have thousands of smaller algorithmic communities. And because of that fragmentation, cultural trends move differently. They rise faster, they spread unevenly, and they disappear just as quickly. A trend that dominates one corner of the internet might not even reach the other corner. And that change in their internet leads to a bigger question. Was BTS just successful, or were they part of the last moment where the internet could still experience culture together? To understand why this matters, we need to talk about a concept from media sociology: monoculture. A monoculture moment is when an enormous number of people experience the same cultural event simultaneously. Before the internet, this happened by mass media. When a new album from Michael Jackson released, the entire music industry stopped and paid attention. When blockbuster films premiered, millions of people watched them within the same opening weekend. Major television finales became global events. Everyone was watching the same thing. Everyone was talking about the same thing. The culture moved together. For a short period in the late 2010s, the internet briefly recreated that dynamic, and BTS happened to rise exactly during that window. Fandom wasn't just large, it was also incredibly coordinated. ARMY organized streaming campaigns, they synchronized global watch parties, they trended hashtags across multiple countries simultaneously, and because platforms like Twitter and YouTube were still capable of amplifying shared trends across massive audiences, those fan actions became visible everywhere. Every comeback felt like an event, not just within the fandom, but across the entire internet. Millions of people were watching the same premiere, reacting to the same performance, participating in the same conversation. Today, that kind of synchronized cultural experience is becoming increasingly rare. The internet no longer moves as a single crowd, it moves as thousands of overlapping subcultures, which means the conditions that helped BTS rise, which was a highly organized fandom combined with platforms that still amplified shared global moments, may have been historically unique. They also emerged during one of the final moments when the structure of the internet still allowed a global monoculture to exist. A moment where millions of people could still gather around the same release, the same performance, the same cultural event at the same exact time. When BTS first began releasing music, very few people expected them to reshape the global music industry. They came from a small company, they sang primarily in Korean, and they entered an industry long dominated by Western artists and traditional gatekeepers. Through storytelling that invited interpretation, a fandom that involved a global network that crossed languages and borders, BTS built something far larger than the typical pop career. Influence is no longer confined to one region, stories can travel across languages, and audiences themselves have become active participants in shaping what rises to global attention. BTS may not be one of the last artists to break these barriers, but they were among the first to show what was possible. In that sense, their story isn't just about one group and 7 members. And in some ways, this video itself began with a much smaller story. I'm not 13 anymore listening to DNA for the first time. Back then, BTS was just a group I liked. Now, years later, I can look back and see something much bigger. Not just the music, but the cultural system that formed behind it. The world BTS as a group returns to is very different from the one they left. The internet has changed, the industry has changed, the way culture spreads online has changed. And that raises the real question. Not whether BTS can succeed again, but whether the internet is still capable of creating another moment like them.
That first phase was the building and the amassing of success and fans and achievements. You could have ended there and it would have been a perfect journey.
It's still a big challenge, and I'm really afraid of a new chapter. We have to show different things, and I don't want to regret, years later, man, we had to do it again. We just shouldn't have stopped this journey.